Greetings, this is Joe McKesson, Marketing Director for the New Orleans Opera, aka Opera Joe, and welcome to this week's edition of New Orleans Opera at Large. I'm here today with probably one of the most exciting guests we're going to have this season, among many, but this one, for me, is the most exciting. I am trying to discover New Orleans, as I've said before, one piece of art or one artist at a time, and this year, one of the jewels in our season is Champion. Terence Blanchard's opera Champion, based on the story of Emile Griffith. This story is profound on many, many levels, not just from an auditory point of view, not just from a visual point of view, not even the story. It's how it all impacts you at once. And in that, it is what opera is always meant to be, a live, living performance of a section of time that is supposed to impact you to understand movements in life that are not necessarily yours to understand, or something that you want to understand that will give you at least a little bit more light on the subject. Opera as the Gesamtkunstwerk, the complete work, brings everything together. And that's something that our guest today, Terence Blanchard's done very well. Now, I want to give you all just a little bit of background on this amazing artist. There's a lot of things about Terence Blanchard that here in New Orleans, we don't even know, because he's had a profound life. First of all, I first came across this man through his soundtracks. He's a prolific soundtrack writer, having written over almost 36 total soundtracks, if not more.
Close to 50.
Close to 50. See,
Yeah.
there's so many that you don't even know.
Yeah.
See, and even I don't know, and that's why I love to discover it. But it was vis-a-vis these soundtracks that I came to know your work, because of the themes that were attached to the different characters. It's such an intimate approach to soundtrack writing. So I'm really pleased to have you here today, Terence. Welcome to the show. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here, man.
Thanks.
I'm excited about being here. Really, really.
Well, I am too. I'm a little cock a hoops, as I call it, because I'm a little giddy. So I hope you'll forgive me.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
So we're here to talk about Champion because a lot of people with the opera don't know what Champion's about. And I want to kind of walk them through this as we get closer to the performance so that people can kind of understand what it is a little bit at a time. New operas are always enigmatic to people. They make them worried. They're like, well, this is my big seat, and I don't know if this is what I want to see. But more and more we're learning that opera is the same as it ever was. It has very specific purposes that it's supposed to bring across in numbers and arias and soliloquies and dramatic moments. And that's something that Champion has in many, many ways on many different levels. So why don't you, I want to kind of step back a little bit from that, because I was talking about your soundtrack work, and, it was the soundtrack work that led me to hear New York Scene. Like, I didn't hear New York Scene until a decade after it had come out.
Oh, okay.
And that was like your first Grammy win, right?
Well,
Collectively.
Yeah. I mean, actually, the one of the first was I think a Tale of God's Will.
Tale of God's Will, the Requiem for Katrina.
Yeah. And it was a very interesting time because I always talk about how I never felt like I earned that Grammy. I felt like the city of New Orleans earned that Grammy.
Wow.
Because the story itself was so powerful, and there was so much that we were trying to say musically. Basically, what I was doing was trying to tell the story of everybody's experience in the aftermath of the hurricane here in New Orleans, and that emotional energy just propelled all of the music for that particular CD. Right. So it's one of the things when I talk about that one in particular. I always said the city of New Orleans won that Grammy. I was just a part of that moment in time.
Wow. Well, that's interesting because that's kind of that you jump to exactly where I was going a little bit because it's the Requiem for Katrina that for me, just watching you as an artist, going from soundtrack and then going back and hearing like the hardcore jazz, like in New York Scene, and the stuff that you do with Wynton, and that was with Art Blakely, that particular album. He was the veteran at the time, and you were the young man coming up. That's like 1984 times, right?
Yeah,
So,
early '80s. Yeah.
So I look at these influences and I think about the soundtracks, and of course soundtracks are very operatic in their nature, as we were saying earlier, or as I was mentioning, and it was really in that idea of the Requiem for Katrina that I, as a listener, heard a flip. A conversion, and you just said it just now. It's like, well, I didn't really earn the Grammy. The city of New Orleans did.
Yes,
and that's exactly what opera composers say. It's like Giuseppe Verdi never set out to write an opera about the Risorgimento. He wrote an opera about how he felt about his people.
Yes,
and then the people took the opera to the streets. To protest the French.
Yes, isn't that something?
Yeah. Hundreds of years later, music and opera still has the same appeal.
Yes.
So to me, I feel that and champion a little bit. So I kind of wanted to ask you, when did you make your personal connection with opera? What was the first opera you heard, and what influenced you artistically?
Well, a lot of people don't know this about me, but my father studied opera. So
I know. I didn't know.
Yeah, I know a lot of people. They look at me as a jazz musician, but they don't realize that I heard opera in my home from the time that I was a little boy.
Wow.
My father would play all of the classics, in the home, and he was a baritone, and he studied with a guy named Osceola Blanchard, and my father's name was Oliver Blanchard.
Okay.
And Osceola Blanchard was a guy, he was an African-American guy who took it upon himself to really, take young African-Americans who were interested in music and teach them opera. My father happened to be one of them. So I had heard the music over and over, and that experience, and in telling that story to a friend of mine in St. Louis was the reason why they called me to do the opera, because when they were talking about doing this hybrid jazz kind of opera thing, a friend of mine who was there, why am I blanking on his name right now? It'll come to me. But my friend, he said, listen, I have the perfect guy because he heard opera and he's a jazz musician. And that's how the whole thing came about. So for me, opera was a very personal thing and a very powerful thing in my life, because listening to Corman, as a kid, I didn't get it at first. When I was a kid, my dad would put on the records and you hear doors slamming in the house because everybody's trying to find some peace and quiet. Because my dad would be sitting in the front of the house.
Yeah, I'm so your
dad.
Yeah,
just singing away. You know what I mean? And that was back in the days when you had the Phillips recordings with the wax paper, and I was not allowed to touch those recordings.
Oh no, they were holy, sacred pieces.
Yeah, man. I used to look at them with reverence, like, wow, this is great. So being called to actually do one and to create an opera was a very emotional thing for me, because my father's not around anymore. But, I looked at it and I go, wow. I started to question, like, whether everything that I experienced in my life led me to that moment. I studied composition here with Roger Dickinson, who's a great classical composer, and studied jazz, obviously, then, started working in the jazz world as a performing artist, and then Spike called me to start working on his films. And when I started doing the film thing, I remember having a conversation with Roger, and Roger told me, he said, listen, you're getting experience in learning how to write for orchestra to do something bigger than this. And I couldn't see what it was at the time.
Wow.
And next thing you know, here it is, I'm writing an opera, and for me, it was, and it still is, an amazing experience. I'm working on my second one right now.
No, I was going to ask you about that because I got a little bit of the subject matter last night from Robin. I didn't know if you could discuss it or not.
Yeah, we could talk about it. I mean, it's Charles Blow's book called Fire Shut Up in My Bones, where, this guy was from Gippsland, Louisiana, and the opera is basically about his struggles growing up, being molested as a youth, and his struggles with his own identity, trying to figure out who he is and how it's still affecting his life today.
Wow.
But going back to Champion, the thing that was really amazing about that entire experience for me was, I kept having these flashbacks, man, to my youth, writing this music, because my mom's sister, she's also a vocal coach and plays piano. So I heard this type of music in my house all the time. I was the black sheep bringing the jazz recordings into the house.
You were the bad boy.
Yeah,
with the jazz.
yeah,
That's so amazing.
Yeah, I mean, in my house, they were like, okay, that's great, but you need to keep up with this. And I'm like, okay, no, I love that too, but I also love this. So that's why I said earlier, having all of those experiences seemed to have led me to this point in this moment in time. And it's, man, I can't tell you the type of experience that it's been, sitting in a room, putting, notes on a page, hearing, because you got to remember, you talked about my film career. Being a film composer, when I start writing, the product is done.
Right, that's true.
I'm looking at it, I'm seeing the scenes, I'm getting a sense of pace from the dialogue,
right.
The way things are cut together versus what I read in the script. Which
is the great thing I love about your style, because you can actually hear you riffing on the dialogue.
Oh, no, thank you.
Yeah.
No, that's a product of working with Spike, but I'll tell you about that later. But this was totally different because I'm sitting in a room imagining what this is all going to be, and I'll never forget it, man. When we started to block Champion for the first time, I got emotional. It blew me away.
Wow.
Because to see these characters move around on stage and interact, that were coming and singing notes that were coming from my mind, it was just an overwhelming thing. And then to have great people doing it at the same time, man, it was just an incredible experience. That's why I've always told those guys, in St. Louis, I've been very, very grateful and feel very, very blessed to have started this section of my life with them because, they're very dedicated people and they do great work.
They're wholly dedicated to their art in every way. Paul Kilmer is an amazing man.
Yes, and
my
very
career
funny
with him.
too.
He's hilarious.
Yes.
If you need a joke, or if you even feel a little bit blue,
right?
He hosts the rehearsals, right?
Right.
He comes and checks on everybody. He goes around and makes sure everybody's cool,
right?
But he was at my opera debut.
Oh, nice.
Because it was the Hinsdale Opera, this old company in Chicago.
Okay.
They lasted for a long time. They do like 2 productions a year.
Wow.
And
cool.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Full artists, a lot of lyric opera apprentice artists, and Paul was one of them.
Nice.
And I got a small part, just a walk on, one-liner kind of thing. I was 18 years old, and Paul Kilmer was my buddy. I was his village idiot, as it were. So we would follow each other around on stage during the choruses and have fun. Make it really fun for everybody.
Well, that's the thing I think people don't really understand who've never been to opera. It's really a great experience.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I always talk about in opera, in this day and age when all the young kids want to deal with virtual reality, right? To me, that's exactly what opera is. You know what I mean? It's you see these three-dimensional...
Like the analog.
Yes, it's the analog version, and listen, I didn't get it until I was commissioned by St. Louis, and they brought me in to see their season one year, and I saw Salome, I saw Ghost of Versailles, and I can't remember the third one. But I watched these performances, and man, I was so juiced. I was so hyped, because I'm sitting there saying, wow, the sky's the limit, in terms of telling a story, because this is not something, where you're looking at it on a TV screen. These are people, in some cases, that come out into the audience. It's a 3D experience. It's interactive, And I was just blown away by that experience.
Well, it's funny because when I first heard about this opera happening, back in 2013, that's when I first got wind of it. Of course, when the world started to, right? I mean, I'd known about the commission, but you know how that stuff is. It falls in and out of your psyche. But when I really thought about it for the first time, it really resonated. It made sense to me because, there's no closer equal to the tenor than the trumpet.
Interesting,
It's the same kind of obligato line. It's high, it's exemplary, and it's vocal writing.
Yes, well, what's interesting about it is one of the reasons why I love cello.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I love the cello because to me the cello sounds like it's in a vocal range for me.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of how I relate to sound.
Like a gorgeous mezzo or a beautiful baritone voice.
Exactly.
That's Placido Domingo's favorite instrument.
Get out of here. I didn't know that.
That's true.
Really?
He always said he wanted his voice to sound like a cello if he could emulate any instrument.
Wow. Now I'm going to have to go back and listen again.
I know, because it's actually
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
It's actually there.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah,
That's
to me,
really interesting.
these are the details, right? This is what the artist is, how they think,
And of course,
Yeah.
listen, man, one of the things I think that's also interesting about this was the realization of, because you got to remember, being African American, growing up in New Orleans, opera, and even though I grew up with opera in my house, to most people, my friends, opera was something that existed in another world.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's been like the big revelation for me, because working on this opera with all of these productions, the number of people who grew up in the church,
Mm-hmm.
who started out in the church
Yeah.
and became great opera singers, and they bring all of that experience to bear
Mm-hmm.
in their performances. Like the woman who's going to be singing here, Karen Slack.
Yeah.
She is phenomenal.
Yeah.
She performed the role when we did it in San Francisco with Opera Parallel, and she got a standing ovation every night.
Wow.
And I was one of the ones standing every night.
Well, her particular role is the toughest role, I would say.
Oh, of course.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because Emile Griffith is not the go-to guy a lot of people think of to make
Right.
an opera about.
I know.
Now, as it turns out, he's actually an amazing person to make an
Sure.
opera about, because he touches on so many worlds. And right now, to me, the opera hasn't even grown any dust since 2013,
Right.
because the topics that you were dealing with in
Yes.
2013
They're
have
very
doubled
relevant.
down.
Yes.
In this new era we're in.
Well, it's very relevant. It's one of the things. It's interesting to hear you say that, because when I originally brought the idea to the board who was commissioning me to do it, they didn't get it. They said, "Oh, a boxing opera." I'm like, "No, it's not a boxing opera."
Mm-hmm.
So I actually sent them the book 9, 10 and Out, which was the autobiography, and the line that made me want to do the opera was when he said, "I killed a man." Well, I guess I should give some background about the story first.
Give us your capsule if you
Sure,
don't
yeah,
mind.
sure. So Emile Griffith was a welterweight champion in 1965, and he had fought Benny Perrette twice, and each one of the guys had won one of the bouts, and they were fighting for a third time. And like anything, Benny was trying to get a little advantage psychological advantage over Emile in the press conference. So he used a very derogatory term for a gay male in the press conference, and Emile kept saying, "Why is he saying this?" Because even though Emile was a gay man, he never came out and said that he was gay.
Right.
And for this to go public was a big deal for him. And when they started to, when the fight started, the night before the fight, Emile had a premonition that he shouldn't go through with it. The interesting thing about it, too, is that Benny Perrette had just fought a guy named Gene Fulmer, who was a big, heavy hitter.
Yeah.
And, back in those days, those guys wouldn't take a year off. They would fight, and then 2 months later, they'll have
It was
another
like show
fight.
business
Yes,
every weekend.
yeah.
They got my $200, right?
Right. So Benny wasn't really fully recovered from that fight.
Yeah.
And then he got into this fight with Emile, and Emile caught him in a corner. And there's a line in the opera, 17 blows in less than 7 seconds. And you can actually watch it. There's videotape of it. And he knocks out Benny Perrette. He wins the fight. Benny Perrette, as he's being taken out of the ring, falls into a coma. He lasts for about 10 days, and then he dies. And, Emile's life just takes a tailspin after that. He didn't fight for a while. They actually took Friday night fights off the air because of it.
Wow.
And then actually when Emile tried to fight again, because he had to make a living, you can watch it in the fights. Anytime one of the opponents backed up in a corner, he never followed him. So the whole experience still had a very profound effect on his life.
Yeah.
To the point, where he was in a bad way.
Yeah.
But there's a line in his autobiography that made me want to do it. He said, "I killed a man and the world forgave me, yet I love the man and the world wants to kill me." And to me, that's a very powerful line.
Yeah.
And it, unfortunately, is still a very relevant line.
Unfortunately.
And I also thought about it because it hit me that this guy became world champion. And I thought about the first time I won my first Grammy. We were talking about it.
Yeah.
As soon as they called my name, man, without thinking, the first thing I did was to turn around and kiss my wife and go up and receive the award, because I'm sharing the moment with somebody that I love, right?
Yeah.
And to think that this guy could not share that moment with somebody that he loved blew me away. I don't know how it came to that. It just hit me one day thinking about it. And that made me really want to tell this guy's story, because his story is not a story about being a gay male. His story is a story of redemption. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the power of that and how this guy survived. Because in the documentary Ring of Fire, he actually, even though he's suffering from dementia, he wants to go and meet the son of Benny Perret Jr. years later, and as he's
he wants to make amends.
Right, after he had become a grown man. And you see it, it's in the documentary. He's standing there in Central Park talking to him, and the son says, well, my mom she just couldn't bring herself to come, and Emil goes, I know. And then Benny Perret Jr. says, listen, from the family to you, we just want to tell you, we don't harbor any bad feelings. And Emil starts to cry. You can tell that he'd been carrying the weight of this around all of his entire life. Because the other thing people don't really realize about these guys that I learned later after I started working on the opera is that they were friends. They used to play basketball together. And as a matter of fact, when Benny fell into the coma, Emil tried to visit him, and the family just couldn't have him there, and he never got a chance to say goodbye.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. See, that's a slice of life right there. And that's the very stuff. Those are the kind of circumstances that opera teaches.
Yes.
Yes. You know, life regrets, especially when we think about PTSD. I mean, if you think of the circumstances of that moment when he killed this guy for whatever reason, whatever loss of control, whatever moment that was, that snap, you know, that's so the tragic moment for everyone.
Yes.
And we all feel that. We all have that moment. I mean, even if it's like dropping the kids off at the wrong place. Sure. That moment where you clutch your heart, you know. And that's what I love about opera, is that it brings that clutch of heart to us in a very passive yet beautiful way for us to accept, so that you can really storytell with this.
Well, the thing about opera, to me, that makes it powerful is that opera can make you drop your guard. You know, you can come into any theater and sit there and say, okay, because I did it when I went to view Salome, and I'm sitting there going, okay, well, what is this about? Right. And then next thing you know, I'm an emotional wreck, because the story was just very powerful. Same thing with Ghost of Versailles. Yeah. And you know, a story like this, combined with great directing and great performances, I can't stress that enough. Yeah. You know, the performances. Arthur Woodley is an amazing vocalist and an amazing actor.
We're so lucky to have him.
He is ridiculous. You know, Arby Ellicott, he's the young up and coming guy who's making a huge name for himself.
He's got some really intense energy.
Yes.
I listened to the aria last night, you know, just kind of putting together the research again, because he's got a real handle on it.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's like an actor's soliloquy.
Well, here's the thing that's like really interesting about this to me, because it's a modern opera. So many of the vocalists relate to the story themselves.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Because of the things they're going through in their own lives.
Oh, yeah.
When we workshopped the opera, there was a young kid, I can't remember his name now, but he was playing the role of Emil the Fighter. And when he sang the aria, What Makes a Man, he cried. Yeah. And he started talking about, he said, this is going to become my audition piece for the rest of my life.
Good for him.
Yeah. I mean, I was very honored by him saying that. But to me, it spoke to the power of Emil's journey. Yeah. You know, because like you said, listen, man, I'm just trying to tell this guy's story. You know, it's one of those things where I feel weird taking credit for this, because this was his journey. The power of his spirit to endure all of that.
Well, you know, you bring up an interesting point that I've been kind of thinking about. Someone at one of the intermissions for Orpheus brought this up, because we were talking about Offenbach, you know, and how Offenbach had to pretend to be Christian to basically sell his music, right? And that he really couldn't get a big hit until he made fun of the Second Empire by getting on their bad side. Then he became popular, right? So he kind of used that moment. Yeah. But and we were talking about, he says, what is it about composers and musicians and artists that understand this? And I said, well, first of all, you have to understand that the artist faces 90% rejection in their life.
Not only 90% rejection, But here's the other thing you got to remember about artists: we deal in truth because your art, well, it can't lie.
Right. You know when you blew it.
Right. Right. So in dealing in rejection, that makes you face why you were rejected.
Right.
You know what I mean? Over and over again. And sometimes it may not be justified, but I'm the type of person where I don't necessarily put that blame on somebody else. You know, if that's happened to me a number of times, I say, well, there's something that I'm doing that may not be reaching this person or a group of people, whoever I'm working with. Right. And it makes me dig deeper.
Brings the problem back to you, right? I believe in that too. It's obviously, what am I not getting is the question I ask.
Exactly. Exactly. Because sometimes, listen, man, I learned this being a film composer. One of my mentor in the film business was a guy named Miles Goodman, who was a dear friend of mine who died too early. But one of the things he used to tell me all the time, he said, listen, he did his own orchestrations, but he always had an orchestrator. And I asked him, I said, well, why? He said, listen, man, you need to have an objective set of ears. Yeah. He says, because sitting in a room by yourself, objectivity can go out the window sometimes.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Here's my new aria. It's an hour long.
Exactly. And those lines are staying right here because I'm really trying to draw out the emotion of the character. And it's like, no, it's meandering. you need to cut it down.
You need like 3 minutes.
Exactly. So I mean, that's part of the process. Facing your own truth and being honest with it and honest with yourself. That's one of the things I've always loved about being an artist. Being a musician and an artist has helped me grow as a person. In so many ways.
Well, and I can see that, it's interesting. The soundtrack experience that you have immediately shows up in this opera because you're not telling it linearly. No. You're telling it kind of almost from a cinematic approach, right? Right. You're starting at the end. Right. A little bit. Right? Which is really cool because that's kind of the thing now a little bit. Right. Did you see the movie Arrival?
No, I haven't.
Oh, my God. All right.
I haven't. Okay.
Don't give it away. That. And to the audience, you guys should check out Arrival if you want to think about non-linear thinking. But anyway, so you kind of start at the end a little bit. And now, why did you choose those particular devices to tell this story?
Well, one of the things because we didn't want to do the linear thing. We kept thinking, that's kind of like the easy way to do it. The interesting thing to do is to see, because Emil is dealing with dementia, let's go with that. And let's get inside of his head. Let's see, because, my father suffered with dementia.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he suffered with dementia for 10 years, man. And it's a hard thing as a family member. It's a hard thing to deal with, and then to watch my mom have to deal with it as well. It was very rough. But the thing you see is that, sometimes the people who deal with dementia, their minds will jump around in their own history and deal with topics like they're there at that moment. And we wanted to bring that to this opera. So that's why you see we have 3 Emils. We have Emil as a kid, Emil the fighter, and Emil as the elder statesman, if you will. And the elder statesman, he's always on stage, because
that's right.
The entire opera is inside of his head, and these are memories that he's flashing back to while he's getting prepared to go see Benny Perrett Jr. in Central Park to talk to him.
He's reliving his memories.
He's reliving the entire thing.
Yeah. And I love that because you actually get a sense of the dementia, and now that I kind of have this insight that you have it in your family, because I have some experience with it too, and I picked up on it in the music. It's like from the get-go. Yeah. You're at you've created a universe.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I tried to do musically is, there are moments when he's in his mind and he's, not totally with it. The music kind of creates this ethereal thing. But what I tried to do is, like, in some of the flashbacks, because I remember with my father, sometimes he would say something and you would go, okay, he's back. You know what I mean? He's healthy. Right. You know what I mean? Because he would say it just as clear as day.
Right, just like the good old dad used to be.
Exactly. Yeah. And then your hopes would get up, and you'd be like, oh, this is a moment in time. And then next thing you know, he would revert back to the way that he was. And that's kind of what happens in the opera.
Yeah.
You know, a bit. You know, we want the flashbacks to be real.
Yeah.
You know, and then come back to the fact that no, this is his memory. This is his flashback. This is him recounting these experiences.
Yeah, and it's those transitions, you know. I mean, the fabric of the score to me is lush because of that, right? Because we're in this environment, this world, you know. But of course, for our audience to know, we also have our standard arias,
Yes.
ensembles, not a strong chorus, but an ensemble of voices
Yes.
that kind of represent those people around him, or kind of like Offenbach a little bit, public opinion, right?
yeah. Well, you know, that was a deliberate thing. I want, you know, the chorus doesn't really become a chorus until the end of the opera.
Right.
You know
It's
what
like
I mean?
desperate people.
Well, you know, because actually, for me, it goes back to the church. You know what I mean? It goes back to that moment where I've been in church and you hear some music that, you know, it just overwhelms you, you know, and it allows you to deal with your own redemption, and it allows you to forgive yourself.
Wow, that's a mouthful right there.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And that's what I wanted to have at the end of the opera. So, and I did it deliberately. So in the beginning of the opera, you know, the chorus is there, but a lot of them, they're singing in unison. You know, they don't, like you said, it doesn't even feel like a chorus. It just feels like a gaggle of people just hanging out.
Yeah.
But then later on, you know, in the second act, near the end of the second act, then it starts to become like full-blown chorus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the witnesses are kind of coming forward a little bit, you know, and I think that's great. Now, we have a very traditional audience,
Sure.
and modern opera has been slowly creeping in here. We've been kind of throwing it at them a little bit at a time. You know, we did As One in June,
Okay.
and it was very well received. We had a great house, and we had some really great breakouts. We went to area groups and met with them. We met with the transgender teen awareness group, and we met with the transgender veterans.
Good.
To try and make them aware of the opera as well, you know, when an opera is written for them.
Sure.
You know, how do you see, or maybe you don't, but maybe how can Champion, you know, as part of the 300th anniversary of New Orleans, you know, resonate with the city? You know, obviously there's a lot of paradoxes in the city of New Orleans. Which is one of the reasons why I love it and why I'm doing this podcast. You know, but to me, this opera kind of sits squarely in the middle a little bit because of your catharsis being a native son, right? Growing up here with the opera background that is innate to this city since the get-go, right? 222 years we're celebrating next year of opera in New Orleans.
Oh, nice.
You know,
Nice.
Yeah, it's really in our 75th, right? So it's kind of like you can see this trajectory where, you know, and jazz is born out of opera,
Right.
And that sensibility, the idea of people talking and riffing and having drama played out. You know, I mean, you know, from the very beginning, even ragtime, you know, had that. You know, this is the Palladian view. These are the people, the dilettantes, and the cakewalk, and all that stuff. You know, so how do you see Champion kind of fitting into that world now? You know, over 200 years later, you know, as part of the tradition and legacy of the city.
Well, the interesting thing about Champion to me is that Stephen Lord is a great conductor. Man, he scared me to death. You know, because
Conductors will do that, don't
they? That's true. Yeah. That's true. But we were having a conversation, and he was talking about. He said, in my opinion, he said, I don't think we've ever really defined what American opera is, which I thought was an interesting thing. And
there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah, and he said, for some reason, I'm feeling like this opera has a chance to kind of define that because it's bringing the best of what America has given the world of art, you know, opera and jazz, you know. So we don't call it a jazz opera. We've been calling it an opera in jazz.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's not like I have a jazz band swinging the entire time. No, they're very lush orchestral moments. So that's the first thing. The other thing, too, is that just culturally, this particular opera, I think, fits into everything that is happening in our culture right now. It's a opera that has a very popular sport as the backdrop. You know what I mean? Which for me, I've also wanted to educate people about what boxing is. Yeah. Because I've been into the sport for over 20 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and one of the things that I don't like that people talk about is when they go to a fight, they say, "Oh, kick his butt," and you go, "No, no, 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 no. This is a art form. This is a science."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? These guys are well-trained athletes.
Yeah.
They're not just in a ring swinging at each other. That's not what's going on.
Right. There's a poise. There's an etiquette.
There's a point. They call it a dance.
Yeah.
They call it a dance. And as a matter of fact, in one of the productions, we had a guy I think we're going to try to bring him here. We had a guy who was a dancer and a fighter, and he came out and did a routine with a jump rope.
Oh, wow.
And then at the beginning of the second act, he came out and did a routine on a speed bag, and the audience loved it.
Wow.
Because you get a chance to see the art in what these guys do. So you have that. Then for the lesbian and gay community, man, listen, this opera is dealing with issues that are unfortunately still relevant.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's sometimes when you think about it, I know people have very strong feelings about some of these things, but for me, I mean, and I don't want to ruffle any feathers, but I look at it as being silly.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because it's 2017.
Right.
As a human community,
Yeah.
we've been through a lot.
Right.
You know what I mean? And we still have a lot of other things to deal with, and those issues are minor ones. They're not even issues.
Yeah.
They shouldn't even be on the table.
Yeah.
So there's that, and then the mental health community came to the opera in St. Louis, and a lot of those folks made an effort to come and tell me thank you, which I wasn't expecting.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the way we handled the topic.
Right.
Yeah. And it just opened my eyes to what you were talking about earlier, the power of opera, the power of telling these stories.
Yeah.
And one of the things when it comes to contemporary opera, like I said, I grew up listening to all of the classics.
Right.
So I've always wanted my opera to be melodic.
Mm-hmm.
I want the arias to be things that you can remember. I've been listening to La Boheme, every day, and that particular opera just blows me away.
Yeah.
With its power and grandeur. So, with this particular opera, I tried to make sure that I have, even though it's a modern opera, I'm trying to have all of those melodic elements that are coming from the sensibility of a jazz musician.
Right.
But adapted in this world.
Right.
So all of those things together, man, make for a very interesting experience, even for me.
Well, each performance is like a new one, right?
Well,
I mean,
I got to tell you, one of the things that blew me away about having this experience was when we did it the first time. We did it with Denise Graves, R.B. Ellicott, and Arthur Woodley, and Robert Orth, he was there.
Oh.
And we all felt like we were swimming out in the middle of the ocean. Wow. Because I had never written an opera before. And those guys had never sang jazz before. You know what I mean? So we were having these discussions the entire time. Hey man, what about this? And I'm saying, oh yeah, man, go ahead and try it, because hey, look, who am I? I'm not the opera expert here. I have a vision about what I want this to be.
Yeah.
But we were in it together.
Yeah.
And having those conversations, man, with those guys helped me open my eyes, and they talk about how they felt like they were stretching because what I brought to the table.
Yeah.
So for me, that's what true collaboration is.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what the beautiful thing about art. And the cool thing about what's been happening, this will be the fourth production of it, and to watch Arthur Woodley and Aubrey grow in these roles, it's phenomenal.
It is.
I mean, it's phenomenal. I mean,
that's my favorite. When I don't say like I've witnessed it, but that's my favorite thing about watching artists is watching them progress in a role. What they do, especially when they've created it from the get-go.
Yes,
and then they still find more nuance.
Exactly.
It's like
exactly.
Where are you pulling that from?
That's exactly what I was saying when we did it at the Kennedy Center. And I remember going. I didn't get a chance to go to rehearsals because I was on the road touring. But when I went to the premiere, I was floored. And I hadn't been in, because when it was in St. Louis, I heard it every day. When it was in San Francisco, I went to every performance. And now I get to the Kennedy Center, and it's still growing and blossoming. And I was beside myself. I walked up to Arthur, man, and I said, dude, you are my hero. You know, because, and Denise did the production in Washington. Same thing for her, you know, and with Karen, this is going to be her second time. So I know, you know, and trust me, with Karen, she is incredible.
Anybody knows what they're in for. It's
No.
going to be such an exciting night.
No. And that's why I'm saying it, because I didn't know Karen prior to this. You know, and everybody kept saying, "Oh no, it'll be fine." I'm like, "Yeah, you know, Denise Grays is amazing," you know. But when Karen started to sing, man, I was just blown away.
Yeah.
I mean, literally blown away. I know that's a phrase a lot of people overuse, you know, but it's
that's because there's no word.
exactly. And I didn't know what to say. You know, I would just look at her every night and go, where? First of all, not only where's the sound coming from, but the expression.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. When they start to really embrace the story and embrace the arc of the story and know, that's the thing that blows me away with them, is to know how to temper things and then let things explode at the right time to help propel the story. It's a phenomenal thing to witness.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's beautiful, and that, I mean, because that's the process, right?
Yes.
You know, and I think you got a point you just made that really hits me is, you know, when we ask what American opera is, you know, that's that question. What you said after that, to me, is the solution. This collaborative idea, right?
Yes.
Like the most successful operas now are ones where the company and the artists have all come together to help shape this thing. And that's something that actually comes from the film industry and from Broadway, right? It's more, and from jazz, right? Jazz is a collaboration.
Of course.
You know, it's eyeball to eyeball. I'm passing, it's your riff now. You know, here's this section for you. You know, oh no, I'm taking it. You know, and then you just go blinders on. You know, you know, I mean, that's something I've always appreciated about you're playing, because it's like when you're in the zone, it's like he's off. Okay, let's enjoy this.
Well,
man.
look, the same thing happens with these guys. You know, when at the end, I don't want to give it away, but at the end when Arthur sings this one line, man, oh my God, I've seen this thing performed a number of times, and I cry every time, and I wrote it. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Yeah,
you know what's gonna happen.
Yeah. Because I mean, as you're watching it, it's one of the things about Arthur that I think is amazing. As you're watching it, you forget that you're experiencing an opera. Yeah. You become engrossed in the story. Yeah. You know, and then the story just envelops you and takes you on this journey. It's an incredible thing, you know, and it's one of those things. You know, my dad passed before I got to do this, and Arthur knew the story. So when we did it the first time in St. Louis at the premiere, the night of the premiere, when I went up to take my bow after the performance was over, Arthur, he grabbed me and he said, "Man, your dad would be very proud," and I lost it. You know what I mean? Because you know, it's that journey of getting over the initial shock of somebody asking me to write an opera, because I thought they were drunk and out of their minds. For getting over that and actually getting into the process and going through the entire thing, which took me 3 years to do. It's been an incredible experience, an incredible journey, and it's ongoing. It hasn't stopped.
Right. Well, you're already starting a new journey with a new opera, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which you got to invite me. I got to know. I want to be
Sure.
there.
Sure.
I'm begging now.
Sure. And the cool thing about this one too is, like, having gone through the first one, you know, I know there's some things that I'm working on now. Understanding vocal ranges a little bit better, you know, understanding transitions between scenes a little bit better.
Right.
You know, there are a lot of things that I'm trying to work and implement into this one.
Well, like those singers that you know, we're watching your evolution as a composer, right? You know, I mean, that's the thing about us opera fanatics, right? You know, I mean, like watching John Corleone's operas.
Yes.
Tobias Picker. Even seeing from Dolores Clyburn and then him going back to Emmeline. That St. Louis did. Just a beautiful way of learning about him and how he's evolving his own art. Right. Like, I always take things back to Verdi because our people here just love Verdi. We talk about Verdi every production meeting. And it's like, and one of the things that we love to talk about with Verdi is that he wasn't great at the beginning.
Wow, right.
He had, he wasn't great. His first opera was not great. It wasn't until Nabucco that he really resonated. And then from there, the next 10 operas were the same. They were knockoffs of the opera before.
Right.
Each one with a little bit of progression in terms of composition and stuff, because he brought us out of the Bellini, Donizetti romantic movement.
Yeah.
Right? And he brings us into this new world where he's kind of trying to develop dialogue.
Right.
And it wasn't until he evolved into understanding how the duet works.
Joe, dude, you don't know how that's resonating with me right now. I mean, because one of the things, like you said earlier, I was a film composer. Yeah. So let's just take, for example, if you're writing for cello, the range for the cello, there's a certain range for that cello.
Right.
So I've gotten accustomed to writing and being expressive with all of the instruments that have similar ranges from low to high, right? Now, all of a sudden, I have to write for voice where that gets shrunk.
Right. There is limits.
Right.
There are limits, yeah.
And then I have to understand, okay, well, where does the voice bloom?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, totally.
Because there was one particular thing in this opera that I had written for Robert Orth's character where they told me it was a baritone, so, I kept thinking that he could be forceful in the low register, but his voice just doesn't push any air in that register.
That's right. That's
you know what I mean?
That weird middle voice area.
Exactly. Yeah. So I had to go back and learn. Okay, well now I got to go back and rewrite this in a higher register. And it was great that I did it because then I wrote an aria for him that really fit his voice. So I'm going through that right now.
See, that harkens back to that time, too.
Right.
Because Verdi wrote the arias for the singers
Right, exactly.
He would go listen to them and go, oh, she's good here,
right.
he's good there. And so then he would place the arias around, and that's how he met the love of his life.
Right.
Right. I'm a Verdi freak, too.
No. You know what? I had these conversations with Paul.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he's a Verdi freak.
Right, because while I'm sitting there writing this thing for Robert Orth, he comes in and we had this discussion about this.
That is so cool.
So I'm going through it again right now. I don't know who the singer is going to be this time. We're still trying to figure that out. But I'm understanding ranges a lot better, in terms of how to manipulate what I want to say with the story, where I want things to be bigger, where I want to emphasize certain parts of the story.
How that crest of the voice goes,
yes.
or Verdi likes to call slancio.
Yes.
Yeah, one of my favorite music terms.
Well, it's like Puccini. I mean, with Puccini, one of the things that I love about Puccini, I can't pronounce the name of the aria for the female voice. But anyway.
From which opera?
La Bohème.
Oh, Quando Men Vo, or Don Diletta, or Mi Chiamano Mimi.
There you go. That one.
Okay.
Yes. So the thing that I love about that, there's some really, really very expressive higher notes that she sings in a certain period of time, and then all of a sudden it gets big, and then it almost seems like the note goes one note a little higher. You know what I mean? But that one note can be.
That little paginatura thing,
can be powerful.
Yeah.
So there's something, as I was working on something yesterday for the next opera, where I was thinking about that and working on that and trying to figure out where to use that in the storyline. And I guess I'm saying all that to say is that, having the experience of doing the first one is really, open my mind to the possibilities of what I can do with the second one.
What a great point in life, too. You're born in 62, I'm born in 64. I love this period of my life. I had no idea the 50s would be so cool.
Who knew?
Who knew? If I'd known it was going to be like this, I wouldn't have suffered my 30s, I'll tell you. I would have been, oh, no, it's going to get better, a lot better.
Well, what's funny about that? I was having this discussion with my niece this morning. I'm 55 years old, and I was telling her, I said, man, when I was a kid, people would start to think about packing it in at 55. They think they have 10 years until retirement. And I say, for me, I feel like I've just opened the door to a new life.
Yeah.
You know, with this opera career, and this, for me, the possibilities are endless, and I'm excited about it because I don't know exactly where it's going to go.
Right.
But I'm having fun.
arts.
I'm having fun doing it.
That's brilliant. And that makes me really happy because I think that's what this period of life, it's like you're taking your wisdom and you're putting it together and making wholly new art.
Yeah.
You know, and
Well, listen, man, I couldn't have done this in my 20s.
right?
There was no way. There's no way, because I was too busy trying to prove that I could play, and I was trying to prove that I should exist.
The
in the
trumpet
music
life, man.
Yeah, man, you know. Those days are long behind me. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to do that anymore. Yeah, well, this means I don't care now.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm having too much fun just being an artist and performing and playing and creating, and I'm trying to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
You know, because it's fleeting. You know, it's fleeting, and I don't want to miss out. So every aspect of it, when we did Champion for the first time, you know, the people in Opera Theater St. Louis thought I was crazy. I'm like, look, whatever you need me to do, I want to be there, you know, because I want to watch the entire thing.
Yeah.
So I took time off from my touring career,
Wow.
you know, and I would go to rehearsals.
Yeah.
I'd walk around the building, man. I would have nothing to do, but I would just sit there and watch these guys go through, what do you call the seated rehearsal? Sitzprobe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would go through all of that, man. Watching them block the thing, to looking at the designers design the stage, walking around and seeing what the costumes were going to be, and I just wanted to take it all in.
I could live in the theater forever. It's like,
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of like the nightclub thing,
Right.
but cooler.
You know, but that's the thing people need to know. There needs to be an opera about what opera is, because
that would be cool.
You know, yeah, because I think, excuse me.
No worries.
I think the general public doesn't really understand it, you know, because it's kind of like jazz, you know, people don't really understand it who are not in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, people in the community are constantly screaming, no, man, you would love this.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was really great about what happened at the Kennedy Center was there were a lot of people who had come to the opera who had never been before.
Yeah.
And they said they were coming back.
Good.
You know,
That's what we got to do.
Yeah.
That's what we got to do.
yeah, because they had a great experience, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been screaming, I've been saying, listen, man, it's something you got to check out. What's been interesting about it in my career as a jazz musician, all of the guys in my band have come. You know, and,
Wow.
and a lot of musicians that I played with,
Mm-hmm.
they would make the trip. Some of them made the trip to D.C. to go check it out because they said, well, man, if this dude wrote an opera, I need to go check this out. And now they've become fans of the genre.
That's awesome. Well, you'll know you've really hit it with them when they start doing recreations or jazz versions of your pieces, right?
There's been talk of a tour.
Yes, the Champion Tour.
There's been talk of it. We'll see what happens.
Champion All-Stars.
We'll see.
Well, Terence, I can't thank you enough for coming and speaking with us.
Oh man, thank you for having me.
You've already taught me so much about what we have to look forward to at this opera, and I'm really glad you took the time to do that because I want everyone to know.
Oh.
You know, I want the old, the young, the in-betweens, you know, people who've never come. You know, we're starting to build more new audience than we ever have just in the last few months, and it's really exciting because
Yes.
we have
Great.
new young people coming. We have people that we've never seen coming to our website, and so, you know, I think that having offerings like this that are really the living art in real time, you know, as it should exist and as it always has existed, is just going to make a huge mark on New Orleans.
Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, you know, I really appreciate the opportunity to sit here and talk to you about it, you know, because one of the things that I've been saying about this opera is that for those who love the classics, I think this opera has a lot to offer to them. For those who haven't been to the opera, I think it offers them even more. It's one of those pieces that I think fits right into that realm that has a little bit of something for everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
You couldn't see that, but we shook hands.